The Prime Minister has concluded his visit to Japan and is now headed to China for the SCO. But it's the takeaways from Japan that are the real deal for India during such turbulent geopolitical times. Japan has always been a natural partner for India. Its relationship is anchored in shared democratic values, economic complementarities, and maritime convergences. And yet, despite this naturalness, India-Japan ties have rarely lived up to their potential. And there's a reason why I say so. However, this visit, the first by an Indian Prime Minister in 7 years, came at a moment of strategic fluidity. After a heartbreak with the United States, a misconstrued reset with China, and an even more misconstrued rebound with Russia. Against this backdrop, turning to Japan is not only timely but necessary, and the range of positive outcomes, especially the one on semiconductors and defense, are encouraging. And the timing itself is rather deliberate. The visit preceded India's participation in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, a grouping increasingly dominated by China, which is backed by Russia, and including Pakistan, which is ever more entangled in Beijing's orbit today. Now, if India is to remain relevant in this shifting regional balance and beyond, anchoring its partnership with Japan provides an indispensable counterweight. Now, let's decode why India-Japan relationship has remained a victim of its own comfort zone. The India-Japan story is often told with nostalgia. Conferences, policy papers, panel discussions, all of them frequently dwell on the sentimental, the Buddhism connect, Azad Hind Fauj, the elephant gifted to Japan, or Rabindranath Tagore's exchanges with Japanese thinkers. Even in a more contemporary discussion, Shinzo Abe's landmark Confluence of the Two Seas speech in 2007 often dominates, credited with inspiring the vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific and eventually the Quad. Now, these legacies, old and new, are important, but excessive reliance on them has created a trap. Now, when a partnership is framed primarily through the lens of past goodness, it risks obscuring the urgency of present opportunities. Too much of India-Japan engagement has either been anchored in historical frameworks or subordinated to the Quad, leaving bilateral possibilities underexplored. Now, for a relationship described as natural, its underperformance so far in tangible outcomes is striking. India and Japan's partnership has underdelivered because New Delhi has played it too safe. For one, it has not kept pace with Tokyo's transformation into a more assertive security actor, leaving defense technology cooperation underexploited and co-development opportunities unattended on the table. Trade, by the way, has also been disappointing. It has been stuck around $22 billion despite decades of Japanese investments. Japan's vast development footprint in South Asia through the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or the JICA, has barely been woven into India's regional playbook, and especially in the Indian Northeast. Most importantly, India still clings to a narrow view of security, ignoring Japan's sharper recognition that the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific are now inseparably linked. By staying cautious instead of ambitious, India has allowed a natural partnership to remain underwhelming, missing the chance to shape the regional order alongside one of its most reliable allies. And this is what has been course-corrected by India this time around when Prime Minister Modi just went to Japan. So let's talk about the tangible opportunities today. To be sure, there are visible positives with the latest visit. Now, Japan is expected to invest around $68 billion in India's semiconductor and other tech sectors, part of its strategy to diversify away from China. For decades, Japan's official development assistance, or the ODA, was its primary foreign policy tool, compensating for constitutional restrictions on military engagement. Now, India has been the largest ODA recipient, benefiting from infrastructure investments ranging from the Delhi Metro to the Western Dedicated Freight Corridor. Now, between 2000 and 2024, almost 25 years, Japanese investments in India have reached nearly $43 billion, with the metro project and the Maruti Suzuki partnership, etc., standing as a symbol of successful investments and collaboration. But you know what? The fundamentals now have shifted. So the ODA-driven partnerships are no longer enough. To capitalize on this natural partnership, India must understand Japan's contemporary transformation and recalibrate its strategies accordingly. So in my opinion and analysis, there are at least three pathways forward. First, Japan as a counterbalance to China and the global south. While China aggressively positions itself as a leader of the global south, Japan has quietly invested more deeply into these regions. For instance, through the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, or the TCAD, Japan has shifted from paternalistic top-down aid to co-creation, prioritizing private sector partnerships and mutual growth. For India, this offers a natural platform to co-shape developmental narratives in Africa, South Asia, and the Indian Ocean region. India's own neighborhood engagement remains fractured. I'm sure you all know that SAARC is dormant, and nearly every South Asian neighbor, with the exception of Bhutan, has signed on to China's BRI. Chinese investments in strategic ports and infrastructure across Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and the Maldives have created a quasi-encirclement for India. India's neighbors, while wary of Beijing's debt traps, continue to welcome its financial largesse, often more readily than they do India's outreach. Now here, Japan's credibility matters. Unlike India, Tokyo is perceived by smaller states of our neighborhood as a benevolent partner without hegemonic pretensions. Now, building joint India-Japan working groups for South Asia and the Indian Ocean region could create sustainable alternatives to China's dominance. Synergizing India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, or the IPOI, with Japan's Free and Open Indo-Pacific Strategy, or the FOIP, especially its pillar on connectivity in the 2023 iteration, would provide the architecture for such cooperation. The second pathway is definitely technology, defense, and strategic industries. Semiconductors are the immediate headline. India welcomes Japan's investments in this critical sector, which could serve as a pathway for more openings. Now, what comes to mind immediately is that Taiwan's chip giant, the TSMC, has been hesitant to enter India directly, but has invested heavily in Japan, building two plants worth over $20 billion in Kumamoto, with support from Japanese firms such as Sony and Toyota. Now, this creates a potential bridge. Now, come to think of it, this creates a potential bridge. Through Japan's investments in chips, TSMC could be incentivized to establish a presence in India, enabling integration into global value chains. Now, next is defense. Defense cooperation, however, is the area of greatest untapped potential so far. Past missteps, such as the aborted Chinmayava US-2 amphibious aircraft deal, may have left unpleasantness, but these are behind us now. More recent agreements, like the co-development of Unified Complex Radio Antenna, or the UNICORN masts in 2024, are encouraging. Opportunities are abound. Small nuclear reactors, advanced naval vessels, and co-production of secondary defense equipment. Japan's industrial base could align well with India's existing defense industrial corridors in Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, offering prospects for co-export to third markets. Ambitions like joint sixth-generation fighter development, however, may be a little premature, but building a functional defense ecosystem with Japan, akin to India's arrangements with France, or at least so far with the US, is both realistic and necessary. It is heartening to see that defense cooperation has also received its due this time around when Prime Minister visited Japan. And finally, trade and economic balance. While Japanese investment has been steady, trade remains unimpressive. Bilateral trade, as I mentioned, has hovered around $22 billion annually, and it is skewed in Japan's favor. Now, for the partnership to deepen, trade must expand not just in volume, but in quality. Advanced economies, including Japan, are moving toward carbon-adjusted import frameworks. With the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, set to take effect in January 2026, Japan is expected to adopt similar standards. Unless India develops meaningful dialogues to improve climate financing pathways and aligns its exports with such requirements, it risks losing competitiveness in advanced markets in times to come. And here my suggestion is we must take a cue from how Japan has transformed. Now, for India to reimagine its partnership with Japan along the aforementioned lines, it must first grasp Tokyo's own evolution in recent years. Japan's geopolitical position is precarious. Disputes with China over the Senkaku Islands, with Russia over the Kuril Islands, and even South Korea underscore its vulnerabilities. The Senkaku dispute is especially fraught given its linkage to a potential Taiwan contingency. And yet, Japan-China's policy remains ambivalent. While wary of Beijing's assertiveness, factions within its ruling Liberal Democratic Party, such as the Nikkei faction, continue to prioritize economic engagement. And even then, Japan has sought to counterbalance China despite these internal limitations. Next, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has reshaped Japan's strategic outlook. Moscow's growing reliance on North Korea in exchange for potential advanced technology transfers has heightened Tokyo's anxieties. And in response, Japan has released a new national security strategy and a national defense strategy in 2023, marking a historic shift. For the first time since the Second World War, Japan has acquired long-range strike capabilities and committed to unprecedented defense spending. Crucially, Japan now views security as indivisible, linking Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific theaters in response to converging threats. Now, understanding this transformation could position India to fill the gap by exporting co-produced secondary equipment and dual-use technology. And finally, the merging of theaters has become a strategic imperative for Tokyo. This perspective explains Japan's coordinated response in linking conventional security with economic imperatives. For instance, Japan's outreach to Europe has expanded in novel ways, including its participation in the 3 Seas initiative in Central and Eastern Europe, an arena where India is still debating how to activate complex and currently unviable projects like the India-Middle East-Europe Corridor, the IMEC. For India, aligning with Japan's proactive linkages could provide practical pathways to connect the Indo-Pacific with the Euro-Atlantic, both economically and strategically. This would complement India's plans to build strategic gateways into Europe in Marseille, Trieste, and Thessaloniki, and all of this could be done rather well. So basically what is required is that we need to mainstream Japan in India's strategic thinking and imagination. India's policy discourse often obsesses over the United States, China, Russia, or closer home, Pakistan. Japan, by contrast, is treated as a stable constant, too reliable to demand urgent attention. Now, this complacency has been a mistake. Tokyo is not merely a background partner. It is one of the few genuinely trustworthy actors with both the capacity and the credibility to shape Asia's future order. At a time of geopolitical flux, with the spectre of Trumpian disorder looming over the West and beyond, India must not afford to underutilize Japan. Therefore, India's forthcoming engagement with Japan offers more than pleasing symbolism. It comes at the right moment to recalibrate a relationship long described as natural but left relatively neglected. By freeing the partnership from the comfort of nostalgia, embracing Japan's transformation as a security actor, and creating synergy across development, clean technology, defense and trade, and technology per se, India can unlock the full potential of this bilateral equation. Amid fractured neighborhood ties, Chinese assertiveness, and global uncertainty, Japan is the partner India needs the most, not as a friend of the past, not merely as a fellow member of the Quad, but as a genuine bilateral anchor for the future. I'll be back to keep a track on how the implementation part of this wonderful summit fares. Stay tuned.